The 14th Tuesday, we say goodbye. It was cold and damp as I walked up the steps to Morrie's house. I took in little details, things I hadn't noticed for all the times I'd visited. The cut of the hill, the stone facade of the house, the plants, the low shrubs. I walked slowly, taking my time, stepping on dead wet leaves that flattened beneath my feet. Charlotte had called the day before to tell me Morrie was not doing well. This was her way of saying the final days had arrived. Morrie had canceled all of his appointments and had been sleeping much of the time, which was unlike him. He never cared for sleeping, not when there were people he could talk with. He wants you to come visit, Charlotte said. But, Mitch, yes? He's very weak. The porch steps, the glass in the front door. I absorbed these things in a slow, observant manner, as if seeing them for the first time. I felt the tape recorder in the bag on my shoulder, and I unzipped it to make sure I had tapes. I don't know why. I always had tapes. Connie answered the bell. Normally buoyant, she had a drawn look on her face. Her hello was softly spoken. "How's he doing?" I said. "Not so good." She bit her lower lip. "I don't like to think about it. He's such a sweet man, you know." I knew. This is such a shame. Charlotte came down the hall and hugged me. She said that Morrie was still sleeping, even though it was 10 a.m. We went into the kitchen. I helped her straighten up, noticing all the bottles of pills lined up on the table, a small army of brown plastic soldiers with white caps. My old professor was taking morphine now to ease his breathing. I put the food I had brought with me into the refrigerator. Soup, vegetable cakes, tuna salad. I apologized to Charlotte for bringing it. Morrie hadn't chewed food like this in months, we both knew that, but it had become a small tradition. Sometimes when you're losing someone, you hang on to whatever tradition you can. I waited in the living room, where Morrie and Ted Koppel had done their first interview. I read the newspaper that was lying on the table. 2 Minnesota children had shot each other playing with their father's guns. A baby had been found buried in a garbage can in an alley in Los Angeles. I put the paper down and stared into the empty fireplace. I tapped my shoe lightly on the hardwood floor. Eventually, I heard a door open and close, then Charlotte's footsteps coming toward me. "All right," she said softly. "He's ready for you." I rose, and I turned toward our familiar spot, then saw a strange woman sitting at the end of the hall in a folding chair, her eyes on a book, her legs crossed. This was a hospice nurse, part of the 24-hour watch. Morrie's study was empty. I was confused. Then I turned back hesitantly to the bedroom, and there he was, lying in bed under the sheet. I had seen him like this only one other time, when he was getting massaged, and the echo of his aphorism, "When you're in bed, you're dead," began anew inside my head. I entered, pushing a smile onto my face. He wore a yellow pajama, like top, and a blanket covered him from the chest down. The lump of his form was so withered that I almost thought something was missing. He was as small as a child. Morrie's mouth was open, and his skin was pale and tight against his cheekbones. When his eyes rolled toward me, he tried to speak, but I heard only a soft grunt. "There he is," I said, mustering all the excitement I could find in my empty till. He exhaled, shut his eyes, then smiled, the very effort seeming to tire him. "My dear friend," he spinally said. "I am your friend," I said. "I'm not so good today. Tomorrow will be better." He pushed out another breath and forced a nod. He was struggling with something beneath the sheets, and I realized he was trying to move his hands towards the opening. Hold, he said. I pulled the covers down and grasped his fingers. They disappeared inside my own. I leaned in close, a few inches from his face. It was the first time I had seen him unshaven, the small white whiskers looking so out of place, as if someone had shaken salt neatly across his cheeks and chin. How could there be new life in his beard when it was draining everywhere else? Morrie, I said softly. Coach, he corrected. Coach, I said. I felt a shiver. He spoke in short bursts, inhaling air, exhaling words. His voice was thin and raspy. He smelled of ointment. You are a good soul. A good soul. Touched me, he whispered. He moved his hands to his heart. Here. It felt as if I had a pit in my throat. Coach? Ah, I don't know how to say goodbye. He patted my hand weakly, keeping it on his chest. This is how we say goodbye. He breathed softly, in and out, and I could feel his rib cage rise and fall. Then he looked right at me. Love you, he rasped. I love you too, Coach. No, you do. No, something else? What else do you know? You always have. His eyes got small, and then he cried, his face contorting like a baby who hasn't figured how his tear ducts worked. I held him close for several minutes. I rubbed his loose skin. I stroked his hair. I put a palm against his face and felt the bones close to the flesh and the tiny wet tears, as if squeezed from a dropper. When his breathing approached normal again, I cleared my throat and said I knew he was tired, so I would be back next Tuesday, and I expected him to be a little more alert. Thank you. He snorted lightly, as close as he could come to a laugh. It was a sad sound, just the same. I picked up the unopened bag with the tape recorder. Why had I even brought this? I knew he would never use it. I leaned in and kissed him closely, my face against his, whiskers on whiskers, skin on skin, holding it there, longer than normal, in case it gave him even a split second of pleasure. Okay then, I said, pulling away. I blinked back the tears, and he smacked his lips together and raised his eyebrows at the sight of my face. I like to think it was a fleeting moment of satisfaction for my dear old professor. He had finally made me cry. Okay then, he whispered. Graduation. Morrie died on a Saturday morning. His immediate family was with him in the house. Rob made it in from Tokyo. He got to kiss his father goodbye, and John was there. And of course Charlotte was there, and Charlotte's cousin Marcia, who had written the poem that so moved Morrie at his unofficial memorial service, the poem that likened him to a tender sequoia. They slept in shifts around his bed. Morrie had fallen into a coma 2 days after our final visit, and the doctor said he could go at any moment. Instead, he hung on, through a tough afternoon, through a dark night. Finally, on the 4th of November, when those he loved had left the room just for a moment to grab coffee in the kitchen, the first time none of them were with him since the coma began, Morrie stopped breathing. And he was gone. I believe he died this way on purpose. I believe he wanted no chilling moments, No one to witness his last breath and be haunted by it, the way he had been haunted by his mother's death. No telegram or by his father's corpse in the city morgue. I believe he knew that he was in his own bed, that his books and his notes and his small hibiscus plant was nearby. He wanted to go serenely, and that is how he went. The funeral was held on a damp, windy morning. The grass was wet and the sky was the color of milk. We stood by the hole in the earth, close enough to hear the pond water lapping against the edge and to see ducks shaking off their feathers. Although hundreds of people had wanted to attend, Charlotte kept this gathering small, just a few close friends and relatives. Rabbi Axelrod read a few poems. Morrie's brother David, who still walked with a limp from his childhood polio, lifted the shovel and tossed dirt in the grave as per tradition. At one point, when Morrie's ashes were placed into the ground, I glanced around the cemetery. Morrie was right. It was indeed a lovely spot. Trees and grass and a sloping hill. You talk, I'll listen, he had said. I tried doing that in my head and, to my happiness, found that the imagined conversation felt almost natural. I looked down at my hands, saw my watch, and realized why. It was Tuesday. My father moved through these of way, we, singing each new leaf out of each tree, and every child was sure that spring danced when she heard my father sing. Poem by E. E. Cummings, read by Morrie's son Rob at the memorial service. Conclusion. I look back sometimes at the person I was before I rediscovered my old professor. I want to talk to that person. I want to tell him what to look out for, what mistakes to avoid. I want to tell him to be more open, to ignore the lure of advertised values, to pay attention when your loved ones are speaking, as if it were the last time you might hear them. Mostly, I want to tell that person to get on an airplane and visit a gentle old man in West Newton, Massachusetts, sooner rather than later, before that old man gets sick and loses his ability to dance. I know I can't do this. None of us can undo what we've done, or relive a life already recorded. But if Professor Morrie Schwartz taught me anything at all, it was this. There is no such thing as too late in life. He was changing until the day he said goodbye. Not long after Morrie's death, I reached my brother in Spain. We had a long talk. I told him I respected his distance and that all I wanted was to be in touch, in the present, not the past, to hold him in my life as much as he could let me. You're my only brother, I said. I don't want to lose you. I love you. I had never said such a thing to him before. A few days later, I received a message to my fax machine. It was typed in sprawling, poorly punctuated all-cap letters fashion that always characterized my brother's words. Hi, I've joined the 90s, it began. He wrote a few little stories, what he'd been doing that week, a couple of jokes. At the end, he signed off this way. I have heartburn and diarrhea at the moment. Life's a bitch. Chat later? Sore tush. I laughed until there were tears in my eyes. This book was largely Morrie's idea. He called it our final thesis. Like the best of work projects, it brought us closer together, and Morrie was delighted when several publishers expressed interest, even though he died before meeting any of them. The advance money helped pay Morrie's enormous medical bills, and for that we were both grateful. The title, by the way, we came up with one day in Morrie's office. He liked naming things, and he had several ideas. But when I said, "How about Tuesdays with Morrie?" he smiled in an almost blushing way, and I knew that was it. After Morrie died, I went through boxes of old college material, and I discovered a final paper I had written for one of his classes. It was 20 years old now. On the front page were my penciled comments scribbled to Morrie, and beneath him were his comments scribbled back. Mine began, "Dear Coach." His began, "Dear Player." For some reason, each time I read that, I miss him more. Have you ever really had a teacher? One who saw you as a raw but precious thing, a jewel that, with wisdom, could be polished to a proud shrine. If you are lucky enough to find your way to such teachers, you will always find your way back. Sometimes it is only in your head, and sometimes it is right alongside their beds. The last class of my old professor's life took place once a week, in his home, by a window in a study where he could watch a small hibiscus plant shed its pink flowers. The class met on Tuesdays. No books were required. The subject was the meaning of life. It was taught from experience. The teaching goes on.